Headway Themes is a drag and drop framework that makes it super easy to start drawing your website by creating your different blocks in WordPress. You simply draw out the blocks and then select which one you want to display. With each of these blocks, you can style the page just how you want it without touching any of the code. So you could essentially create a web page that looks very similar to this, as you'll see on the home page of Headway Themes. So essentially you can set the color of the background or the type of font that you like on a particular part of a page without having to know lots of different code like CSS or PHP. Now that's what they say. In this video we're going to assess exactly whether that is the case. Now Headway has been running for a few years now, I think prior to 2010, so it is an established WordPress theme with a good support structure, so you can count on them to help you if you need any support when building a website. Now I've been using Headway for 3 years now and have a good understanding of how it works in the back end and its capabilities. So I feel like I'm in a good place to be able to give you some advice on whether Headway is going to be good for your requirements. Now in terms of the pricing for Headway, let's take a look at the page for that. You can get the standard package, which is currently $89, but you can utilize the deluxe option, which is for unlimited sites. And this is $199. Obviously, if you're planning to use Headway for multiple websites, of course, the deluxe option is for you. Now, the prices may seem fairly steep when compared with the price of other premium themes or indeed the free options available in the WordPress repository. So is Headway worth the price? And is it everything it's cracked up to be? Well, in this video, we'll attempt to answer exactly that and give you a balanced review of Headway Themes. I'm not an affiliate or I don't have any association with Headway, so this review is essentially a straightforward, is it good, is it bad, and these are the things that you need to consider. Before I continue, I do need to say that this video is based on Headway 3.8.3, but Headway 4.0 is currently in beta testing. Now the changes that are due to be added in 4.0 may make some of the content within this video less relevant, but the advantages and disadvantages are likely to still be in place given my current knowledge of the beta version that is currently in testing. Let's take a look at a website which has been built using Headway Themes so you can see the potential outcome of using Headway. So each area of this website consists of numerous Headway blocks, and these blocks are within a wrapper, which is essentially the area which spreads across the screen. Now, at the top of this site, you'll notice a grey area with the logo and the text to the side, with also the social icons on the right hand side. You may typically have numerous wrappers on the page and add blocks within each wrapper. With this approach, it means you can have a different background color or image for a wrapper and obviously add an appropriate block or multiple blocks within this area. Now this page is a fairly standard sort of layout that you may see on various websites, so Headway does give you the freedom to design a website in exactly the way that you may like. Now if you scroll down, you'll notice that there are 3 images and a series of example posts with a featured image and various content underneath. You'll notice an image in the center of the screen at the bottom and also 4 separate menus. At the very bottom, you'll also notice some links with a blue background. All this content you see on this page can be constructed by simply drawing boxes in specific areas in the visual editor of Headway. Now let's take a look at what that visual editor looks like in Headway. Now once you've logged into the WordPress administration dashboard, you'll see that Headway is on the left hand side and then you can click on Visual Editor. I'm not going to go through the process of installing a theme. You'll obviously upload the Headway theme in exactly the same way that you would with any other premium theme. So let's click on Visual Editor and then you'll be presented with this particular screen. Now before you start editing in Headway, you need to decide on how your website will be structured and obviously what it's going to look like. Now in this example, the web page called Home will be set up as the home page for the site. So make sure that before you actually access the visual editor, you go back to your dashboard and then make sure that under the settings and then reading, you add the static page as the home page and then also the blog page as the posts page. That means that you can then have a specific design in Headway for your pages and then a specific design for your blog post page. That's one of the advantages of Headway. Now, once you've done that, you can go to the visual editor and then you'll be able to design the first page, which is known as the front page for your site. Now, the first thing you'll see when you click on the visual editor is you'll be asked to select a preset grid or use an empty grid and construct a web page which is bespoke to your requirements. So we could click on any one of these options as listed here in grey, or we could click on use an empty grid. You also have the facility to click on import and export, and that enables you to add a specific layout potentially from another website, or indeed a layout within this website. So that's a fantastic feature that you have inside Headway. We click on presets, and then we're going to click on use an empty grid. The area that you now see with the stripes is known as a wrapper, and this is where you add the blocks like the logo that you see at the top of this site here, as well as the text blocks where you see service 1, 2, 3 and 4, as well as the social navigation to the right here. You'll add all of the blocks within wrappers. Now obviously before you start adding any blocks in the visual editor, you need to have an idea of exactly what your website is going to look like and some of the settings which need to be in place. Now the first critical part of Headway is the setup that you'll be presented with at the bottom. Now underneath setup, you'll notice grid and responsive grid. In short, this is where you add the foundations for the website design prior to adding any of the specifics like the multiple wrappers and the blocks. Now the grid, which is the first option you see on the left hand side, is essentially the width of the site that you would like. So you can drag the default column count and the global column width and global gutter width to an appropriate size based on your requirements. So instead of the global column width being 34, we could drag that to 46, or indeed we can drag the global gutter width in if we like. You need to be very careful with the settings because your website needs to work correctly across multiple devices, including large screen TVs, desktop computers, tablets and smartphones. I won't go into excessive detail on this setup, but if you drag the global column width and global gutter width to the right, you'll then notice that the width of the wrapper widens. Obviously this means that your website will spread across the entirety of a screen if you keep dragging either the global column width or the global gutter width to the right. You'll also notice that when you drag the global column width or the global gutter width to the right, the figure which is shown in the field for the global grid width changes. Now in this example it's 1607 pixels. So obviously this dictates the working area of your website, or indeed the grid where you're going to add the blocks. Obviously this is a necessary area of Headway, and to be fair it has been put together fairly well. The next option down is the responsive grid, and if we click on that, this has two options available. The first one is to enable the responsive grid and the other is to enable responsive video resizing. Now if you're new to website design watching this video and you don't know much about responsive design, take a look at some of the videos to help you understand exactly what it is, but ultimately it is pretty much a necessity in web design currently. The reason for this is that we obviously view websites on different devices, including desktop computers, tablets and smartphones. Therefore, the website design needs to respond adequately on each of these devices. So you see a modified version of the website. So if you do not check the enable responsive grid, the website will be like one of those websites that you have on your smartphone where you have to pinch the screen. Everything is very small and squeezed in on small screen resolutions. As such, checking the enable responsive grid is a very important part of the process. Having said all of that, there are some very important consequences that you need to be aware of when you check this box for enable responsive grid, and we'll get into those implications later on in this video. Now the box for responsive video resizing should also typically be checked because obviously you want to ensure that videos added to your site do reduce in size on smaller devices. Now once you have an adequate setup inside Headway, you can then proceed to editing the wrappers and adding appropriate blocks. Now before we proceed, you'll notice that in the grid settings we've added a global grid width which is too wide for the screen that we're working on. So we're going to change the global column width. We'll knock that down to 52 and then we're going to change this down to 24. At this point you'll notice that the global grid width is now 1800 pixels, and then we'll start to modify the website using this particular width. So first of all, let's take a look at this wrapper that we've got here and assess the options that we've got available. Now if you hover over the wrapper, you'll see this menu bar appear in black on the right hand side. Now there are currently three overall options for wrappers inside Headway. The wrapper can be fluid, with a fluid grid. It can be fluid with a fixed grid or fixed with a fixed grid. In this example, the wrapper is fixed with a fixed grid. What this means is that the wrapper, and therefore the area where you add all of the blocks and appropriate contents, is restricted to the width of the website, which we set up earlier, and as you remember is 1800 pixels. Now a fluid wrapper with a fixed grid, if we change to that now by selecting right mouse button and changing the wrapper to fluid, means that you could add an image or background color which spreads across the entirety of the grid and extends past the width of the website which is specified. However, the blocks that you add within the grid will not expand past the width of the site. This is great if you want to have a specific color in the background and then make sure that the contents you add to the web page sits within the center or specified width of the site. Now this type of wrapper is a good way of controlling everything that you add to your site. Now a fluid wrapper with a fluid grid, if we change to that, gives you the ability to have a background color or image which spreads across the page, but with this type of wrapper, the grid can expand past the width of the site. In other words, if you added the blog post contents within the wrapper, the content could spread out to the sides on large screen devices. So in my opinion, I tend to use a combination of fluid wrappers with fixed grids and fixed wrappers with fixed grids. Now when you click on the cog which is associated with the wrapper, you'll be presented with some options listed at the bottom of Headway. Here you can edit some specifics associated with the number of columns and whether you want to utilize an independent grid. It is in these particular examples where Headway starts to get more complicated for a new user, and it's hard to understand exactly what you're supposed to do at this point. For consistency, I usually leave these options as they are and maintain all of the main setup that was done earlier. However, you can change the wrapper margins, and typically I change these to 0 so there is no gap at the bottom and top of the wrapper, and as you can see the wrapper moves up so it's flush with the top of the visual editor and at the bottom. On the left hand side you can utilize the sticky positioning, and if you check to enable sticky positioning, as you'll see here, the wrapper will always stay in one place when you scroll down the website. So for websites where you have the navigation at the top, this will always be in place when you scroll down the page. So in this example, when we scroll down, you'll notice that the navigation falls off at the top. Whereas with a sticky wrapper, the navigation will always stay at the top like that. Obviously, this is a useful website design feature and a good option in Headway. Now, the next option inside the visual editor for the wrapper options is mirroring and config. Now, if we click on that, you'll notice the options for mirror blocks from another wrapper and a drop down, as well as the wrapper alias and custom CSS classes. And this is a very important part of Headway. When adding wrappers or blocks inside Headway, it is always a good approach to add an alias in this field so that you know exactly what the wrapper is associated with. So you'd simply type in top navigation. The custom CSS class field is where you add a specific reference so that you can add specific CSS in the live editor in Headway or in your child theme. In other words, if you're new to website design, it gives you the ability to add more customized styling to your Headway website, which is outside the scope of what Headway can provide. We'll touch on this in more detail as we go through this Headway review, but this is a critical field that you do need to know about when developing a website in Headway. The Headway options alone, in short, are simply not sufficient to build an adequate, responsive website without utilizing the custom CSS class field and in combination with more comprehensive CSS. Now, the mirroring blocks from another wrapper dropdown, as you'll see here, is also a very important and very well thought out aspect of Headway. In short, it gives you the ability to have different layouts in Headway, but to mirror another wrapper from a different layout to avoid having to recreate the wrapper again. This obviously means that you can keep things consistent from a design point of view and avoids having to replicate work. I tend to use this feature a lot to ensure the website design is consistent. The final wrapper option for responsive gives you the ability to make certain modifications based on screen width. You'll see the option for set breakpoint. And here you'll see a list of different screen resolutions. You can pick one of these screen resolutions and then choose whether you want a setting for above or below a specific screen resolution. In other words, the wrapper can have specific settings for different devices, thus giving you potentially different website layout for desktops, tablets, and smartphones. In instances where you wish to limit the amount of content shown, the responsive options enable you to hide the wrapper or center the items within the wrapper so that everything looks more presentable on different devices. You may wish to utilize the feature to stretch blocks for mobile so that things are positioned more appropriately within the wrapper. I'm sure in previous versions there was the capability to duplicate the wrapper so that all the settings that you add can obviously be copied to a brand new wrapper and then modified appropriately. Unfortunately, when you click on right mouse button for the wrapper, the option for duplicating a wrapper is currently not available. Duplication features are often very important when building a website efficiently and fluently, so it would be of use if that was reintroduced. Anyway, once you've created a wrapper, you can then proceed to adding more wrappers. Now, to add a new wrapper, you simply click on the plus icon at the top here or the plus icon at the bottom. Now, at this point, we're going to change this wrapper back to a fixed width grid because we don't want to utilize the fluid wrapper with a fluid grid because it often doesn't work very well. So let's change this back to a fixed grid. If you click on the plus icon at the top, you'll be able to add a wrapper at the top. And when you add a wrapper, it's typically a fixed wrapper with a fixed grid. And obviously you can then go right mouse button on the option on the right and then change it to a fluid grid if you like. If you click on the plus icon at the bottom, if you scroll down and then click on this plus icon here, the wrapper will be added at the bottom. So we can add a wrapper at the bottom also and then scroll down. And then we can modify that wrapper and add blocks to it as required. So that's how you add wrappers. Let's take a look at how you start adding blocks into these wrappers to build an appropriate web page. So let's scroll up, and all you actually need to do is to click on an area within the wrapper and then draw a box for the size that you'd like. So we'll click on this area here and then we'll drag it across, and there you have a block. When you draw the block, you'll notice when hovering over it, it will tell you the width and height in pixels so you know exactly the space that you've got available for that block. When the block has been drawn, you'll be asked to select what type of block you would like. Now, in Headway, you can choose from the following blocks, which are listed below here. The first option there is the header block, and this is basically where you can add a logo or content which spreads across the entirety of the top part of your site. The navigation block is the main menu area, which you typically see at the top of a website. One of the benefits with Headway is that you can have multiple navigation blocks on one page. Now, this is often a feature that's not available in many other WordPress themes, so it is a significant advantage to have this inside Headway. The next block is breadcrumbs, and basically these are links at the top of web pages which enable you to go back to where you came from. The content block is perhaps the most important block in Headway, and this is where you add your main body content for a page or indeed a post. In other words, this is the block that you use to display the information that you add in the WYSIWYG editor inside WordPress. You can also utilize other page builders and then display that content within the content block in Headway. The next block is the widget area, and this is typically used for sidebars that you see on websites and blogs. But the widget area can also be used to show horizontal areas on your website. The design of the widget will be completed in Headway, but the content, including the type of widgets, will be added in the widget area inside the WordPress administration dashboard. The footer is a basic block which enables you to add certain type of content at the bottom of the website, or indeed in a different location if you wish. The slider block is a basic image slider which can be added on any area of the website. It is, however, very basic, and I don't suggest utilizing this slider because it doesn't have many responsive settings, which are often a necessity with websites these days. The embed block gives you the ability to embed the URL of a YouTube video or perhaps a Vimeo video. The pinboard block is very much like the pins that you'll see on Pinterest, and obviously this is a way in which you can display posts or other types of custom post content. The custom code block gives you the ability to add specific PHP or HTML to display bespoke content on a specific part of a Headway page. The text block is like a very basic WYSIWYG editor. The image block is fairly self-explanatory and enables you to upload an image. The search block gives you the ability to add a search field on a specific area of the website. The listings block provides the capability to list taxonomies like categories and tags, or indeed posts, pages, and authors associated with the website. Now the final option is the social block, and this gives you the ability to have social icons that link to specific social media websites. The number of blocks available inside Headway appears to be fairly comprehensive, and on the face of it, it's a set of fantastic solutions for building a bespoke website. At this point, you should be able to picture how Headway could support you in your website development objectives. You may be thinking, I can add all the things I need for my website using Headway, and it looks like it's got all the options required. But what about the colors, fonts, and spacing that I'd like for my website? How can I change that? Well, we'll get into that shortly, because you don't actually edit the design settings in this part of the visual editor. You actually click on the Paintbrush icon at the top here to modify the design of the site. When you click on this icon, you can then choose the colors, fonts, spacing, and so on. Now this is likely to change in future versions, and everything will all be in one place, but principally the design options and the way it really functions overall will not be too dissimilar. Now let's go ahead and draw a basic design using Headway. I'm going to do this silently and just draw everything all in place, and then we'll continue the video afterwards. But you can obviously watch along and see exactly what I do, or indeed forward the video if you'd like. Okay, so now we've added a range of different blocks in different wrappers, as you'll see in Headway. In this particular design, we've utilized 4 different wrappers, and in each wrapper, we've added a number of different blocks. At the top, you'll notice that we've got the header block on the left-hand side with a navigation block to the right. In the second wrapper, which is below that, you'll notice that we've got a content block with a widget area to the right. And this is what you typically find on a standard block. If you scroll down the third wrapper, we've got some random blocks in there, including the pinboard, the social block, and a custom code block. At the bottom, we've got 4 duplicated widget areas. Now this is a fantastic option inside Headway. You're able to create a block and then duplicate it afterwards. In short, what you should really do is to create one widget, and then you need to go and add all of the design settings by clicking on the paintbrush at the top here. And then once you've added all the design settings for this widget, you can simply duplicate it 3 times, and then all of the settings will be identical for each of the blocks that are shown within this wrapper. That's a great way of reducing your development time. Genuinely, Headway deserve a lot of credit for implementing a feature that's very basic like this, but does save plenty of time. So with a range of blocks in place in each of the wrappers in this example, you could take a look at exactly what the site looks like before assessing the design editor in Headway. Before we actually take a look at the site, we need to click on Save. And then once Headway has saved, we can then view the site. We simply right mouse button and then open link in a new tab. We click on the web page, and then you'll see that we've got the navigation on the right hand side listed here. And on the left hand side, we've got the header block listed as local site. Scroll down, you can see that we've got the content block on the left hand side, the widgets on the right. A little bit further down, we've got the pinboard, we've got the no icons to display for the social icons, and then we've got the custom code on the right with all those widgets at the bottom. Obviously it looks fairly bland, and we need to make some changes to this design. And to do that, we need to go back to the visual editor, and then we need to click on this paintbrush icon here, and then open that in a new tab. You'll then be presented with this screen, which enables you to edit the specific design settings, including the color, the fonts, spacing, and so on. On the right hand side, you'll see global styling as shown here. And here you can add specific text and other font settings, which will be across the whole entire website, so that you don't need to modify each specific block. This is obviously a great time saver in Headway to avoid having excessive amounts of data and settings which need to be managed. Now, underneath global styling, you'll see the option for structure, and this is where you'll edit the HTML document, the body, and most importantly, the design options for wrappers that we've just created. So if you click on the plus icon for wrapper, you'll then see that there's an option for instances. Now, this is a very critical aspect of Headway that you need to understand. Instances relate to each specific wrapper that you created, and therefore, obviously, an instance. It is always wise, in my opinion, to edit each wrapper individually to ensure that you don't end up with a confused design inside Headway. Now, at this point, you need to click on the plus icon for instances, and underneath there you'll notice that you've got 4 wrappers, and in this example, they are all unnamed, with the exception of the one wrapper that we called top navigation. Now, Headway can get very confusing if you don't add an appropriate alias and therefore a name for each of the wrappers and also the blocks. You will get yourself in a muddle when you're designing your website. So make sure that in the settings, which is in the visual editor, and then if you click on a particular block, make sure that you click on config and then add an appropriate block alias in this field here, or indeed if it's a wrapper, make sure that you add an appropriate wrapper name in the field as well. Now, if you notice on the right hand side, if you hover over the wrapper, you'll then notice that a blue box appears around the wrapper. Now, in this instance, we've named the wrappers incorrectly. So the top navigation actually refers to where the content and the widgets are. So we need to go back to the visual editor, and we need to make sure that we make a modification there and change the name. So we click on the settings for the wrapper. We'll go to mirroring and config, and now we're going to change this wrapper to content. And then we're going to click save. At this point, we'll scroll up. Then we want to make sure that we change the alias for the wrapper at the top here. So we'll click on the settings cog, and then in the mirroring and config, we'll change the wrapper alias to top navigation. And then once we've done that, we'll click on save. Now, when you make errors like this, make sure that you then go to the design editor, close off that page. Then we need to go back to the visual editor, and then we'll click on the paintbrush icon once more and open that in a new tab. You'll then notice that the design editor loads up once more. And then if we click on structure and then wrapper and then instances, you'll notice that the wrappers have actually changed names. So the wrapper called top navigation is now associated with where the navigation and the logo is. Now, to edit the design of a wrapper, you simply click on one of the instances. So in this example, we're going to change the design for the top navigation. So we'll click on that. And then a series of options will appear in the editing section below. Notice that you have the ability to change the background, borders, box shadow, corners, the fonts, margins, nudging, which is changing the position of the wrapper, and padding. Now, to change the background of the wrapper, for example, you obviously click on background, and then you can click on customize for the color. And then in this example, we're going to change the background to blue. Now, obviously this is a random blue color, but you can obviously choose a specific hex color and therefore a specific RGB or CMYK reference which you want to use. So you have a series of options for the design of each wrapper, and in this example we're going to click on borders, and we're going to change the border color to white, and then we're also going to add an appropriate width for the border, so we'll change 0 to 5, and then once you've added all of those settings, we can then click on save. Now, once saving is complete, you can obviously progress on to the next wrapper that you need to change. But typically, I like to make sure that the margins associated with the wrapper are set to 0. The wrappers can always go to the very edges of the design, and then make sure that blocks are used for other design settings. Now, sometimes you have options in the design editor of Headway that aren't really that necessary. And in this example, the font option for wrappers is typically not required because the fonts can be taken from either the global styling or from specific font settings that you add to each block. Now you need to be careful with the design settings that you add for each instance inside Headway, because it can get confusing and you can add a lot of data to the database. The process of designing with Headway needs to be done in a very concise and well thought out way, or you could get confused. So Headway gives you the facility to control the design layout from within the wrapper, or use all of the blocks within the wrapper to design things and make sure that everything works in a specific way. Both of which are options that you can use, so control things from the wrapper side or control things through the block. Obviously, with the other wrappers that you've got on this page, you can add appropriate settings. Now, I won't go into any more depth in regards to the settings required for wrappers, as they are fairly straightforward. As I said earlier, I tend to use more than one wrapper on a page, so that the background colors can be modified and you can utilize more options and flexibility across the entirety of the page. Now at this point, once you've actually edited the wrapper, you can go and check out the web page, and then we're going to refresh the site and see exactly what it looks like. And there you'll notice that we've got the blue background and we've also got the navigation structure in place. Obviously, you'll notice that some design settings need to change because the color of the text, or indeed the size of the text, is not appropriate for the web page. Now let's take a look at how you go about editing the design of a block. Now on the right hand side, if you click on the drop down for blocks, you'll be presented with all of the blocks which are currently on this page. So you've got header, navigation, you can edit the content, widget area, we've got the pin board, custom code, and so on. Now, an important thing that I always tend to do is to make sure that you click on the button here so that you can show current layout elements. Sometimes when you add blocks to a page in Headway, it doesn't give you all of the block options that you need. So make sure that you do click on this button here so you've got all of the design options that you require. Now, first of all, let's click on the plus icon for header. And if you remember, as with wrappers, you need to click on the plus icon for instances. And in this example, we need to edit the header for the front page, as you'll see here. Now, just to reiterate, the reason why I click on the instances is because it can be quite problematic in Headway when you edit the wrong block and not the specific instance. So I always find it much more advantageous to find the specific instance of the block that you need to edit and then add all of the appropriate design settings. Another significant advantage of taking this approach is that if you decide to export this particular block from Headway and then import it into a new Headway site, or indeed another template or shared layout within the same website that you're creating, it will take the correct settings that you need and import them correctly. Another key point with Headway is that you make sure that you design the vast majority of your website on the front page first. So that's this particular example, which is associated with your home page. And then once you're happy with that design, you can then move on to designing the other necessary shared layouts and templates that are associated with your website. So when you click on this particular header option, you'll obviously have a range of editing choices below, which are very similar to the wrapper, including background, borders, box shadow, fonts, and so on. Now in this example, we're going to click on fonts, and we're going to change the font color to gray. And then if we want to, we can also change the font family. And if we click on the pencil icon for the font family, we've got the traditional fonts available, and we can also choose a range of Google fonts, which is a fantastic option inside Headway. There are absolutely loads of different Google fonts, which will add a lot more versatility to your website. Now, one of the things you will notice in Headway, and something that you do need to get used to, is that when you add things like the font color, sometimes it will take that color and change the block. However, other times it will inherit a color from somewhere else because you're not actually editing the specific area that you need to edit. So in this example, we need to click on the plus icon for site title. Then we need to click on instances, and remember it's the header unnamed site title. We need to click on that, and because it's still black, we still need to click on fonts and then the font color, and then we need to change that to gray. And now you'll notice that it changes. So you need to be very careful about the settings that you choose inside Headway, and quite frankly, it will take you some time to understand the hierarchy of the navigator on the right hand side here. As well as being able to add a color for standard circumstances when you're simply just browsing through the site, you can also add a color when you hover over the header block. So under the hover here, you can click on that, and then you may wish to click on fonts and then change the font color this time to red. And once you've made those changes, you can then click on Save. We can then head over to the site. We can click on Refresh. And then you can see that local site is in grey, and when we hover over it, it turns to red. So as you can see with Headway, there's plenty of ways in which you can edit and modify the styling to your requirements. Obviously, the way in which we've just edited it there is not very good, but it does give you an idea of exactly how you can make modifications. Now, everything seems fairly straightforward at this point, but if we go over to the design editor and start working with the navigation block, you'll start to see how things become a little bit more complicated. So we can minimize all of these options on that we've been editing. We can go down to the navigation block, which is the next one down, and then obviously click on instances, and you'll see that we've got the navigation unnamed right there. And obviously we click on that, we can make some necessary modifications. Now, once more, you may find that you are slightly confused with Headway, and when you start to edit the font, for example, and change the font color to, let's say, white, it doesn't actually make a difference to navigation. Now that's when Headway obviously is confusing, because it's not actually targeting that area. In this instance, you actually need to target the menu item. So you click on the plus icon here, click on the plus icon for instances, and then we'll click on the navigation for the menu item. We'll click on fonts, we'll change the font color to white, and now you'll notice that it changes. And in very much the same way that we did with the header block, you can also change the color of the text on hover to a different color. So in this example, we're going to change the hover text to black, just to show you exactly how it works. Now obviously you wouldn't do this in normal circumstances, but that's exactly what happens. So let's change the hover color to black, click on Save, and then go and take a look at the site and see exactly what happens. Obviously refresh the site. You'll notice that the words are now in white. When you hover over it, it's got a red background and it's got black text. Let's now go back to the design editor, and we're going to change the background of the menu item to not red, but a different color. So we'll click on the normal navigation menu item, and then in the background, we'll click on the color, and then instead of it being white, we'll then choose gray. Then we'll click on Save, and then if we go back to the website, we'll click on Refresh. You'll notice that it then changes to a grey background. And obviously, that still doesn't look very nice. Now, obviously, when you go to a navigation bar, you can have a hover color when you hover over a particular menu item, so we can go and change that. So go back to the menu item, and then on hover, we want to make sure that this is actually a background, that it's a different color to grey. So we'll go to the color, click on that, and instead of this grey here, we're going to make it a little bit of a lighter grey. We'll click on that, and then we'll click Save. And then obviously we need to go back to the site and see what it looks like, so we'll click on the refresh button. And now when we hover over it, you'll notice that it is a light grey. So there you go. Headway gives you plenty of options. Obviously we could go into how you change the colours, the type of font, and so on. And obviously you do need to make sure that this menu that will be associated with this navigation structure is a lot more tidy. Let's now head back to the design editor and assess some of the other blocks which we have in this design. Obviously underneath home on the left hand side, we've got the content block. To the right, we've got the widget area. Below that, on the left here, we've got the pin board. Then where it says there are no icons to display, that is where we'll have the social icons. So right of that, we've got the custom code block, and then below we've got the 4 widgets which are in a row. Now where you see home, this is the content block, and perhaps the most important block in Headway, where you add body content for a page or perhaps a post. In other words, the information that you add in the WYSIWYG area of WordPress. Now with Headway, you can have a content block which has specific design settings for pages, which includes various different font sizes, spacing, and so on, and then a completely different design for posts. The options that you have available for the content block, if you click on blocks and then click on the plus icon for content, you'll notice a whole variety of different options which are associated with content, including the likes of the entry container, the title, archive title, body text, hyperlinks, images, metadata, headings, subheadings, lists, and so on. There really are quite a number of different things that you need to learn. Now the content block is a great example of a block where you need to know lots of different settings and what they do. You'll notice things like the entry row, the title, archive title, body text, body hyperlinks, images, and so on. And really the only way that you can learn exactly what these things do is by trial and error. You really won't understand exactly what they do when you first start using Headway. Now let's head back to the visual editor and check out the blocks and the particular settings that you can change inside there. Now the first one is the header block, and if we click on right mouse button and open the block options for the header block, you'll notice that you can upload a logo. And to do this, you simply click on choose image, and then if you've already added an image to the media library, you can obviously pick that image, and we've got one here, so we'll click on that, then we'll click on use image. You'll notice that the image looks like it fits outside the area of the block. At this point, we need to click on save and check exactly what that looks like on the front end of the site. So we'll go to the site, click on refresh, and see what happens to that header block. You'll notice that the logo obviously doesn't work very well on the blue background, so obviously we need to make some modifications to the wrapper, but the actual block itself is too small to fit that logo in. So we need to go back to the visual editor. With the wrapper itself, we then need to make sure that the wrapper is bigger so that we can fit everything in. In order to make the wrapper bigger, we go to the bottom of the wrapper and then drag it down. And at this point, we can make the block bigger, drag that down. We may also wish to drag the navigation block down to the same level. And then once you've done that, you then click on save and assess the modifications on the front end of the site. Go back to the front end, click on refresh, and see what happens to that logo. You'll then notice that you can see all of the logo with the exception of the bottom. So we still need to make some modifications in the visual editor. So we'll click on the block for the header, and then we'll make that just a little bit bigger. And we'll also do the same thing with the navigation on the right hand side. Once we've done that, we'll click on save once more. Go back to the front end of the site, and then we'll click on refresh. You'll now notice that the logo is appearing correctly at the correct size. However, one of the things you do need to consider when uploading images to various blocks is the size of the image does need to be correct so that it appears effectively within the site design. In this example, we obviously really need to make the logo a bit smaller so that we can have a smaller block. When you do this, you'll notice that the navigation on the right-hand side also changes and becomes increasingly untidy. Obviously, this is because you have too many pages in the menu. Now, if you drag the browser in, you'll notice that the navigation on the right hand side obviously stretches down the page and the logo on the left hand side reduces in size. But if you keep dragging in, you'll notice that the navigation turns into a drop down menu underneath the logo, as you'll see here. And this is the mobile menu inside Headway. Now let's take a look at the specific block settings for the navigation inside the visual editor. And obviously to do that, we can go to the navigation on the right hand side here and open block options. We can drag the options up a little bit further so that we can see them at the bottom better. Now with the navigation block, you can click on the search on the left hand side and then enable navigation search. So obviously you can have a search facility within the navigation. You can also choose to have a search position on the right or left, and also you can add some specific information in the placeholder for the search. So it might be type to search, or you may wish to just have search within this field. The home link can be present within the navigation structure. So obviously you simply click on this checkbox here, and then you can decide on exactly what the home link text will be. Obviously with any WordPress menu, you can typically just add this information in the menu section of the WordPress administration dashboard if you don't want to add the home link and all the information here. The orientation can be aligned to left, right or center, and you can also utilize a vertical navigation. The navigation is set up for a horizontal structure in most instances, but obviously you can, if you wish, choose the vertical navigation. The drop downs will give you the option to have a specific effect, including fade, no effect and slide. And obviously you can also check for hover intent, and if you click on the question mark, you'll be able to see exactly what that means. If you have any difficulties using Headway, these question marks are all over the place, so you can understand exactly what that setting does. The responsiveness section is very basic, and you can check the box for responsive select. When you check that, that basically enables the mobile menu that we just saw. When you drag the browser in, or when you view the website on smaller smartphone devices, the mobile menu will be shown. Now, if you were to deselect this, you'll notice that the navigation menu does not turn into a mobile menu. So let's take a look at exactly what happens when we do that. Click on save, and let's go back to the site. We'll click on refresh, and now what we'll do is we're going to drag this site into the small screen, and there you'll see that the navigation menu does not change. You can keep dragging it in, and you'll notice that we don't have a mobile menu. So obviously it is in most instances important to have a mobile menu because this is obviously very ugly, doesn't look very good, and isn't effective for small screen devices. Let's go back to the options in the visual editor for the navigation. And if you click on config, this is where you can add the block alias, so you can give that block a particular name. So in this example, we may wish to call it the primary navigation. And obviously you can add appropriate CSS classes for this navigation. If we take a look at this completed site here, the social icons on the right here have actually been added using a navigation menu. And then we've added some icons to that using the custom CSS class that you've got available here. So in order to create this particular social menu that we've got on the right hand side at the top here, we've needed to utilize specific custom CSS which is not within Headway. Now that's one of the challenges that you'll find when using Headway, is that sometimes you're not able to complete them utilizing all the settings inside Headway. You'll also notice the import export feature on the left hand side, and this enables you to export all of the settings, including all of the design which you've completed for the block, so that you can obviously import that into another website or indeed another area of this site. The final option that you'll see at the bottom is the responsive control, and we've obviously assessed this in association with wrappers, and it enables you to control this particular block on different devices. So you can set what's known as a breakpoint, and if you click on this drop down, you've got a choice of different screen resolutions. So you can choose to have this particular screen resolution here, which is 1024 pixels, and then you can choose what you want to do with that particular screen width. So you can have it to apply above the screen width or indeed below the screen width. So if you want that particular action to occur below the screen width, you'd choose max width. If you wanted those things to occur after, you'd basically ensure that you applied minimum width. And then you've got some options beneath there for disable blocks height, attempt to center the block elements, gridify lists, and hide this block. So the responsive control is a way in which you may wish to reduce the amount of content on a page by hiding a block, or using some of these other options as listed here. Or another scenario would be to have two navigation blocks with different designs, and then within different breakpoints you have different navigation blocks. So it's a great way of manipulating your design so it's both responsive and it also adapts to different screen resolutions. So there's lots of different ways in which you can utilize the responsive control, and this is typically available in many of the blocks in Headway. So there you have a fairly comprehensive overview on what Headway can do in terms of designing a page, which includes a number of wrappers and blocks within each wrapper. I could obviously spend a lot of time going through each block and the design settings that are available, but this would take a very long time. So at this stage, I'm going to focus on highlighting the specific advantages and disadvantages of Headway, together with some other features that I think are pertinent in this review. Now, first of all, Headway does give you the facility to design a website in almost exactly the way that you would like it. Perhaps you've seen a website on the internet that you'd like to replicate, and in theory, you can do a lot of that work in Headway. You can get everything into the correct position, add the right colors, specific font, the font size, spacing, margins, and so on. Before I move on to some of the other specifics I like within Headway, I want to be very clear about a particular issue that may cause people to avoid Headway. In short, the responsive settings inside Headway, and that includes each block and the wrappers, are simply not good enough for a typical person who will be classified as a Headway customer. What I mean by that is, while there are plenty of options in the visual editor and design editor to design the website effectively for a desktop computer, each block and the overall settings in Headway do not go anywhere near far enough for responsive design. So in the visual editor, when you click on the setup and then responsive grid, so we click on setup and then responsive grid, and we've got this checkbox here called enable responsive grid. It basically means that Headway takes over and implements a range of styling processes which dictate far too many options for your website design. Instead of the particular options being within a block or indeed a wrapper or column perhaps within the website design, this checkbox essentially sends the website into absolute disarray, and potentially it will adversely affect how you want your website to work. It really is a checkbox that has far too much control over the design of the website. It is an unfortunate irony with Headway that it has so many options and so many wonderful things inside it that this one checkbox has the ability to destroy all of the great work and resources that it delivers. What it really means is that within each block, you will need to add custom CSS. So if we go to the navigation block, and if you click on config, you'll need to add a CSS class in this field here. And once you've added that CSS class in this field, you then need to reference that within your child theme, or alternatively, if you don't have a child theme, you can utilize the live editor, which is in the design editor in Headway, and then click on this icon at the top here to reveal the area where you add the custom CSS. Now, what I mean by referencing the custom class within the live CSS editor or your child theme, I basically mean that you've got to add lots of CSS code. And CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And Cascading Style Sheets is the coding, if you like, that you use to style websites. Now, all of the styling that you do in Headway is basically done via a checkbox scenario by selecting the right font, color, margins, and so on. I like to put it like this. You can add all of the styling and appropriate requirements for your website design in Headway for the desktop design of your website, but, and this is a very big but, you'll need to add CSS and appropriate coding in your child theme to make Headway work across different devices. This is an absolute necessity, and I simply cannot see a way around it inside Headway to avoid adding all of this extra CSS. So if you're not sure what CSS looks like, we've got some available in this particular child theme. Now, if you scroll down, you'll notice under here, page body content text resize, we've got some CSS. And this is the type of stuff that you will need to write when using Headway. Absolutely, categorically, yes, you will need to add this to make sure that Headway works correctly across different devices. Without fail, I'm not listening to anyone that tells me you do not need to do this. Yes, you do. Otherwise, your website will simply look unprofessional, untidy, and absolutely not fit for purpose. Now let's take a look at the website that we've already completed, which is this one here, and see exactly what happens when we drag the screen in. And this particular site has all of this CSS associated with it, so lots of things should change. So let's drag the screen in. And you'll notice that the logo moves to the center. We've got the social icons in a completely different design with a brown background. The images are on top of each other. And if you scroll down, we've got the posts listed 2 in a row, whereas previously they were 4. Keep scrolling down. And then you'll notice at the bottom, the menus are also different. So if we scroll that browser back out again, you'll start to notice how everything starts to maneuver around again. And this is responsive design. And you cannot get this web page to work like this without adding extra CSS in Headway. So it simply does not do a good enough job on its own without knowing extra CSS, which I find a massive challenge for someone who doesn't really understand CSS when they first start using Headway. It really is a big learning curve that you must understand. Let me pick a few issues that I have with this design to show you how irritating the process can be when having to modify the automatic code that is generated by Headway when you check the box for Enable Responsive Grid in the visual editor. So when we click on Setup and we've got Enable Responsive Grid selected, this particular design will go into its own set of control processes as a result of checking that box. And you need to utilize CSS to stop that. So let's take a look at this logo at the top here. And we've added some specific CSS for this logo. So if we go to the visual editor associated with this page, which is this one here, and at the top we've got logo desktop, and we need to click right mouse button, open the block options. And in there, under the config tab, you'll notice that we've got the custom CSS called logo desktop. Now, if we copy that, then we need to go and try and find that CSS within the child theme. So we'll go Control Find, we'll paste that in there, and you'll notice that we've got some CSS added in the child theme to further control that particular block. So what I'm going to do now is remove that from the child theme and then show you exactly what happens when we take that CSS out. Then we'll click on Update File. And once we've done that, we'll head back to full screen. We'll go to the site once more, and then we'll click on refresh. And you'll notice that the logo then goes smaller. And the reason for this is because in the visual editor, we haven't actually got this logo block set up wide enough. Now, if we were to make this wider and then click on save, we should be able to rectify the problem. So we can go back to the site, click on refresh, and you should notice that the logo is sorted. However, when the website responds, and therefore it's at different screen resolutions, the other blocks that you've got to the side of the logo will then have an adverse effect on this particular block because we've widened it in the visual editor here. So the challenges that you face with Headway are ultimately down to the one-size-fits-all controls which are implemented in this setup area underneath responsive grid. As such, it is pertinent in these circumstances to make sure that that logo is as small as it can be. Go back to the child theme and make sure that we add that CSS back in there, and then click on update file. So what really is the issue and the problem that I'm trying to highlight inside Headway? Well, if we go back to the visual editor and we select, for example, this navigation here, and we'll click right mouse button, open block options. There may be a variety of different options on the left hand side here for various checkbox scenarios, whether it might be for the orientation of the menu, adding a home link, the drop downs, and so on. But it is a fundamental flaw of Headway that they have failed to give you sufficient control by way of a checkbox system to change responsive design settings on a block by block basis. I should not have to add custom CSS in the child theme and then link a specific custom CSS class, which is listed, as you can see here, in this particular custom CSS field. Now, these particular challenges have been raised in the Headway community forums on numerous occasions. Now, Headway's response to these comments would typically be, well, we can't provide an option for everything. That's why we have the custom CSS field. But the customer who wants to use Headway typically wants the checkbox scenario. So they do not want to continually repair the website by adding custom CSS for almost every block in Headway. If the typical Headway customer wanted to write CSS and PHP, they wouldn't use Headway at all. The expectation, therefore, of the customer is that there should be more checkboxes and therefore options to ensure that the block responds in a way which is representative of a good responsive design. Now, if we take a look at the bottom of this particular design, you'll notice that we've also got the 4 menu widgets at the bottom. Now, each of these widgets will display a specific menu from the WordPress administration dashboard. However, once more, there are insufficient settings in place within each of these blocks to control how they respond across different screen sizes. In other words, these 4 widgets will be controlled by the standardized responsive settings which Headway dictates as a result of checking the enable responsive grid. So let's take a look at one of these widgets. Right mouse button, open the block settings, and then we'll click on config, and you'll notice that the custom CSS class is menu-footer widget. So we'll copy that and try and find out where the CSS is in the child theme for that particular custom CSS class. So we'll go there, we'll click on Control F, paste that in there, and here you'll notice the menu-footer CSS. You'll notice inside this CSS that we've got something called media queries, which basically enables you to change the design at specific screen resolution sizes. So between 860 pixels and 980 pixels, we wanted to change the font size so things are a little bit more tidy. Once more, you can't make these modifications in Headway settings, so you have to add this CSS in your child theme. Keep scrolling down. You've got the menu footer resize area where we're actually changing the text once more. And if you keep scrolling down, we've also got some settings to change the columns. Now, all of this basically means that we're trying to make sure that instead of showing 4 in a row, as you'll see at the bottom here, when the screen actually moves in, we want to make sure that these columns at the bottom then turn into 2 in a row. And then finally, when you get down to the very small screen, you'll only see 1 in a row. And obviously all of those 4 widgets then line up on top of each other. Now, Headway, or indeed anyone else, might be watching this video and thinking, why are you doing that? Is it really necessary? And my answer to that is absolutely, fundamentally, yes. because the way in which I've set up this design is in line with the approaches used by many other websites, including some of the most prevalent websites on the internet. My issue is, why do I have to do all of this excessive CSS in my child theme when I should have the options in each block? Now, the principles behind this request are fairly straightforward as far as I'm concerned, and many of the page builders that are currently available for WordPress offer such logic. In fact, they give you the ability to add not just a block and a wrapper, but a more systemized control, which includes the use of a wrapper, a row within a wrapper, columns, and then the block goes within the column. With this kind of approach, it enables you to modify the design for the wrapper, the row within the wrapper, the specific column, and the block. Now, obviously, when you've got a system like this, which is available in many of the page builders, you are able to take more finite control over specific areas of the website. Now, for the life of me, I cannot understand why Headway does not take this approach moving forward, while adding the appropriate settings in each block and therefore removing the one-size-fits-all approach which is currently in place in the visual editor and obviously underneath the setup area, which really does cause too many problems. Now, just so you know, if you were to uncheck Enable Responsive Grid and then click Save, you'll notice that the site starts to go a little bit haywire once you drag the site in. Nothing happens. You can see that none of the CSS forces things into a scenario where everything is stacked. Everything simply doesn't stretch. So it's not responsive and it's not doing anything to work correctly with each device. It's a very messy scenario and obviously gives you a website which is not going to be optimized correctly because Google does not like non-responsive websites. So it is a necessity within Headway to make sure that you do check the Enable Responsive Grid. But the settings that are linked to this Enable Responsive Grid, quite frankly, are not sufficient enough for responsive design. Another issue that I need to highlight within Headway is the inability to modify text size for the website across different devices. So if we go to the design editor that we've got available here, click off this and OK. Then we go to the blocks that are available and you'll see that we've got a number of different blocks here. Now, regardless of which block it is, you cannot edit the text size for different screen resolutions. You'll only be able to add one text size which will be applicable to different screen resolutions, and this really causes many particular issues with your responsive design because sometimes you'll have far too big a text which is inappropriate for a small screen device. Now, to highlight this issue specifically, I'm going to choose the particular design inside this website which is for the single post. We'll click on Edit, and then you'll notice on the right hand side that we've got this sidebar which is basically a widget area. And for this particular design, you obviously can click on the blocks on the right hand side and then the widget area. We can change some of the font sizes as you would do for general settings inside Headway, but we can't change the settings across different screen sizes. So if we go to the actual web page associated with this, so back to the site, and we'll click on one of these posts here. Now here's what the post actually looks like, and you've got some dummy content on the left hand side and the sidebar on the right, which is a widget area. Now the text sizes that we've got in place for the widget titles have been added in Headway, and the links have also been added as well. But we can't add specific sizes for different screen resolutions. So if we click on the box to minimize the browser and then start scrolling in, you'll notice that the text does start to change in size for the sidebar. Keep scrolling in, keep scrolling. There you go. You can start to see the text is changing size and the sidebar itself is modifying itself when we start squeezing in before a certain point where the sidebar itself won't be seen because we don't want it to be shown on certain devices, and at that screen width you'll only see the post itself. So in order to have those settings where you can see the text resizing, you can see it getting bigger now because the browser screen width is getting bigger, you'll need to add CSS in the child theme inside here. So you'll need to learn exactly how to add responsive text CSS inside here. Now that's obviously a challenge for people who don't really want to do that when they buy Headway. They want it all done for them. Unfortunately, you won't be able to do this. If you don't add appropriate CSS to make the text change in size, you'll end up with a very untidy structure on this sidebar where the titles will move onto a new line and also the links underneath will also move on to a new line, and it will look very, very untidy, and that's simply not good enough. Now at this point, I want to just go back to the child theme and show you the absolute necessity of adding media queries. And this is an example which we looked at earlier for the footer, which is the media query to make sure that all of those menu widgets at the bottom of the website maneuver around appropriately across different screen widths. And essentially what you're doing with media queries is adding some specific screen resolutions where you want certain things to change. So in this example, you can see that we've got a minimum width of 501 pixels and a max width of 859 pixels. Now within that media query, we want to change the way in which the column works within Headway. Once more, this cannot be edited inside Headway by way of a checkbox scenario. You have to do it here. So media queries are absolutely critical to responsive website design, but as I've already said, there are very few checkbox scenarios inside Headway which deal with the challenges associated with media queries. I can honestly tell you that if you fail to learn CSS and how to write media queries properly, you will not be able to design responsive websites in Headway. It is absolutely essential that you add these media queries to your child theme. So all of these issues I've raised with Headway are very critical, especially in an era where we're all using different devices to access websites. It is fundamentally a flaw of Headway to not include appropriate settings to deal with the challenges of responsive design. Unfortunately, the development process with Headway is somewhat worrying in some regards, given that they still fail to listen to their customers. You may remember earlier I showed you how the navigation block turns into a drop-down on mobile devices. So if we go to this particular website here, and then if we scroll the browser in, you'll notice that in this example, we've got the mobile menu showing, which is this drop-down menu here. And this really does not look very tidy, and it's not up to modern standards for a mobile menu. And one of the other issues with this mobile menu is it is part of the one-size-fits-all enable responsive grid, where Headway makes a decision as to when this mobile menu is shown. You don't have any choice over the exact screen resolution where this mobile menu appears. Do you want it to appear on an iPhone 6 Plus, or indeed any of the larger smartphone devices, or do you want to wait for the standard screen resolution smartphone devices? You do not have that choice in Headway, and that is troubling. So in other words, Headway decides at what screen resolution you will see this drop-down menu. Again, this is a very poor decision-making process on behalf of Headway, and there should be a checkbox or set of responsive options as to when this specific navigation block turns into a drop-down on a mobile device. Now, this particular problem is a fine example of the development curve with Headway. I can confirm in the 3 years I've used Headway, there have been numerous requests from various Headway users for a better mobile navigation menu. Now, let's just take a look at this particular forum thread, which was very recently, and it's yet another person who is asking for a better responsive menu than the one which looks outdated currently that we've just taken a look at. This has been mentioned over and over and over again in the community in Headway, and it has been repeatedly ignored, as if to insinuate that everyone who develops in Headway should know how to install a plugin which will then overwrite this navigation structure and overwrite the settings in Headway, and they've got to go down a very convoluted road in order to change the setup of the navigation structure in Headway. For them to ignore this development issue for 3 years while spending a disproportionate amount of time redesigning the back end of the Headway community and the website that you see over here is completely unnecessary and frankly a worrying trend in the way in which Headway is being developed. So really, when thinking about it, I'd suggest that Headway does 80% of what you probably need correctly, and then it drops like a lead balloon, leaving you with far too much CSS that needs to be written, and it really should not be this way for the typical Headway customer. Realistically, that customer is someone who wants to check boxes and get the design sorted quickly. Instead, they're left with that dreadful field called the custom CSS field, which many people will look at with horror when they don't really know how to do CSS or PHP. They probably had completely different expectations, and that is my worry for people who are choosing Headway. You need to be very careful about how much of that work you want to learn, and obviously ultimately the kind of professional design that you really want. Now, Headway may say that the whole platform is a base, and I can understand that comment to a certain degree. I like using it, and I can use it because I know how to use CSS and to add appropriate PHP where required. But I would hate to be starting from fresh now and going through the learning curve that I didn't expect to do. On the face of it, I thought Headway was something completely different, but when you start to dig into the options available with each block, you then start to realize that you will need to learn far more than you think you did. Perhaps I was naive, but the videos, the information on the website, and other reviews led me to believe that Headway had the capability to easily deliver on my requirements. Now, I've taken a look at a few of the blocks inside Headway and the challenges that they pose. Now, genuinely, there are other blocks inside the visual editor, as you'll notice here, that have very similar challenges to the issues I've just talked about. Now, the way I think Headway should move forward is obviously to rectify the settings and issues associated with each block, so that the way the website responds is on a block-by-block basis and not a one-size-fits-all approach as dictated by the Enable Responsive Grid checkbox. And I know I keep pointing to that, but unfortunately it is a checkbox that has far too much control over the responsive design in the site. Now, the development team should understand and appreciate how each section of the website needs to respond in a very individual way. I would prefer a system very similar to other page builders where specific columns are added into a wrapper. This could be 1 column, 2 columns, or maybe 8 columns depending on the design required. Within each column, you would then add the block, and then specific responsive design settings can then be applied to the column or the block. Now, the answer towards this particular approach from the Headway development team may be that such an amount of settings and structure would bloat the database and therefore reduce the speed of the site. As such, a solution I would suggest would be to encourage the development process, which includes all the appropriate settings in each block, and then when the design is agreed and everything works as required, you simply export all of the information from the database and it generates appropriate CSS files which can be used to show the website in an appropriate design. At this point, you could export all the data and templates associated with how you created all that CSS from Headway and save this information somewhere else, potentially using the JSON format that is currently in place in Headway, and then at this point you could delete all the unnecessary Headway design tables to reduce the size of the database. Now, this coincides with my final criticism of Headway, which is that if you add another template and shared layouts because your website is fairly complex, you'll find that your database gets a little too big, and this can hinder the speed of your site, which is obviously critical in search engine optimization these days. So if you go to the top here and click on this drop down, and you start to add lots of shared layouts and lots of different customized pages. So you click on this single here, and then underneath all the pages, you add a specific design for each page. You will start to bloat your database with excessive data. Now, obviously, you can reduce these problems by mirroring wrappers and doing certain things in the way that you use Headway, but ultimately, you will start to bloat things up if you add too much data associated with specific designs. So the balancing act that Headway really needs to agree on is to provide the customer with a sufficient amount of settings within each block and the structure as highlighted to control various aspects of the page in a more specific way, with the requirements to also maximize speed as well. I hope the Headway development team take heed of this advice because many of the suggestions are already within Headway community forum and appear to have been ignored to date. I do worry that the strategic direction of Headway is somewhat misguided and they really need to understand the requirements of the Headway customer. Before I finish this video though, I do feel it's pertinent to highlight one or two of the other fantastic advantages which are within Headway. Now, once you've designed the main front page of the site, and typically you'll do this at the start of your website project to make sure that everything including the navigation, logo and so on looks as you like, you can then click on the drop down here, and then for a particular area of the site, let's say it's the archive, you can click on edit, and then you can actually clone a particular page which you've already created. Now, that's fantastic inside Headway because you can then create all of the necessary content. You can mirror things from one template to another, and then you can modify certain areas which you need to be different. That way it makes things a lot more consistent, you can replicate things effectively, and it obviously reduces the development time. Now, at this point we're going to click on Customize Current Layout, And then when you get that, you can choose to clone a particular page. And we're going to choose front page at this point, and then we'll click on clone layout. Headway will then proceed to add all of that content from the front page to the archive page. Now what you'll notice on this page is that the blocks are in blue, and this indicates that they are mirrored from a different page. And obviously in this example it is the front page. So if we were to click right mouse button, open the block settings for this particular block, you'll notice that they are mirrored from the top mobile menu, which is on the other template, which is the front page. However, the approach that I would typically take is to mirror the wrappers instead of the blocks. So I click right mouse button, I'd open the wrapper options, and then instead of the block being mirrored, I click on mirroring and config, and then I would choose the appropriate wrapper from the front page design. And then you'll see that the whole wrapper is mirrored. I find that this way tends to be more of a solid approach when you mirror a wrapper as opposed to specific blocks. However, in some instances you may need to take the mirroring blocks approach from other designs to make things a little bit more cognizant to your requirements. So with Headway, in theory, you could have a completely different design for your front page, your standard pages on your site, your blog page, the blog post design itself, and the archive pages, and that obviously includes categories, authors, and so on. You can even have a different design for each blog post if you like to, but obviously this is not really a good approach because not only do you need consistency across your site, but also this will add more data to the database, which may slow down your website. Headway works very well also with custom post type plugins. So if you add a specific custom post type like testimonial pages or indeed e-commerce pages, that particular post type will show up underneath the single section in Headway. So you'll have post, page, media, and you'll also have all of your particular custom post types. So you can then add appropriate designs inside Headway for those custom post types. Now the snapshots feature is really good. You'll see that at the top here. This basically gives you the ability to click on previous versions of your design if you make any mistakes, or indeed if your computer crashes at an inappropriate time. You simply click on the snapshot that you want to revert back to and then click on rollback. Now if you're not comfortable with adding a child theme to your website, if you click off this snapshot here and then go to the actual design editor, you can click on this button here for the live CSS editor inside Headway. And in here you can add specific CSS which will control various blocks inside your website design. Another thing that you do need to be aware of is when you're designing the site, you may need to click on Tools and then Clear Cache to ensure that any design changes you make are shown on the front end of the site. You may find yourself getting confused when you actually make design setting changes, click Save, and then those changes do not appear on the front end of the site. This may be because some of the information has been cached and therefore you won't see those changes. And one of the options in Headway I particularly like is the ability to generate a template from all the work that you created. So when you've added different wrappers, blocks and design settings to various different layouts, you can then export a template for all of that work. Obviously that complete template can then be imported to another website and you can use the same design framework to build a brand new website. Obviously if you added appropriate custom CSS in various blocks and wrappers, you also need to copy all of the CSS from your child theme and paste it in the new website child theme so that everything works exactly as it did previously. Now to do this you need to go to the WordPress dashboard. You'd simply click on Headway and then Templates. And then at this point you click on Export Current Template, and then as you'll see here we've imported this particular template as shown by this turquoise box here. Now when you actually export the template from a site that you've added loads of different settings to, you can actually edit the export file, which is typically in JSON format, to quickly change the colors and fonts so that they are specific to the new site that you want to design. Now if you don't want to export a complete template of the whole website, perhaps because the new website you're creating is not that big and you just need particular parts of that website, you can simply go to the visual editor and then you need to select a block and then export the block settings, and that obviously includes all of the design settings as well. Now in this example you can't actually export from one of these blocks on this page because they are all mirrored. At this point we need to click on the drop down and go to the front page and click on Edit. Click on OK, and then you'll find yourself back on the front page design. Now you need to check one of the particular blocks. We'll choose this navigation here, open the block options. we'll scroll down to import export, and then you simply need to click on download export file. Now in the same way that you did with the template, you may wish to edit the font type and colors for the block settings so that when you actually import that file to the new website, you've got the correct colors and fonts that you require, and everything else in terms of the settings and design will be as you need it. So there you have a fairly comprehensive review of Headway themes. There really are many different advantages and some fantastic things that the development team have added to Headway. But my word of caution to anyone choosing to use Headway as their site is to think very carefully about how much you want to learn about CSS and other coding that may be required for your site. Genuinely, Headway does not provide enough settings for responsive design. You will need to add specific custom CSS classes and then add that CSS in your child theme or indeed the live CSS editor